Hi, my name is Julie Ann Link, and welcome to the Music Link. This week on the Let's Link project, I'd like to welcome Nadina Mackie Jackson. Thank you so much for being here, Nadina.
Hi, Julie. Thank you for having me. It's lovely to meet you and to be on this amazing series.
Thank you so much. So, just to get started, could you please share with us an overview of what you do as a professional musician?
As a bassoonist, if things were normal, I'm usually collaborating, and they are somewhat normal, collaborating with composers, preparing for concerts, wondering how to get tours happening, and fighting off the odd gig here and there. So it's a little bit easier to talk about my past as a more mainstream type of musician, and then describe to you how the career has grown and really what a mysterious frontier it can be and how it's always changing. So, yeah, the overview includes having been in big orchestras from a really young age and moving into more solo work, but being in smaller orchestras and teaching all along the way. In Canada, we don't have any actual positions. We're always contract teachers, but you can still establish a good studio and juggle that like crazy. And branching out into touring more solo works and more exploratory types concerts. So now what I'm doing is I play once a week at the local village market if it's not raining, and it's been raining for the last 3 weeks, but next week looks good. And there I kind of that's a microcosm of my life. I bring things that I haven't tried before and things that I have tried a lot, but I'm bringing my whole pedal board and my loop pedal because I feel safe experimenting there and developing the reflexes. But I also play all my concertos for them, minus the orchestra. And some people recognize them. Nobody cares as long as it's pretty. And it's always changing. It's always
Mhm.
changing, but forever influenced by the foundation of our traditional training, which is that kind of rigor stays with you all your life. But then what to do with it? There aren't too many examples of people who have taken all that information and turned it into a voice that's truly revelatory and
Mhm.
and exploratory. There are people who are making incursions, but and that would be my goal in the short time that we have on the planet, is to find a way to combine the voice. Also looking for opportunities, and I find it a tremendously elusive thing and a skill within itself to find opportunities that are not obvious, ways to perform and develop the voice, because you can do a lot on your own, and I do that. But yeah, and also right now the overview includes catching up on all the work that had to be put on hold while I just run around the country, putting tens of thousands of kilometers on the car and flying to do not that many shows, but whatever shows I can get, and then teaching. But you leave your family in the dust, you leave the house in the dust, you leave every practical aspect of your life. So I'm having the great opportunity to catch up on that, finish my books, get the house restored, and before the concerts all start again next year, really.
Could you
And
tell us more about where you grew up?
so I'm born in the northern part of British Columbia. Our ranch was a mountain ranch, so there were lots of natural hayfields, and I was in front of Nadina Mountain. Nadina is a First Nations name. I'm not First Nations, but that was our area. And so I've only been on tour in that area once. And when I got to stand up in front of the audience and say, they knew who I was, but I got to say, hello, I'm Nadina. The whole room ripples because everyone, there's rivers and the mountain's visible for so far. It means mountain that stands alone. And I'm born in Burns Lake, which is a tiny town, a little dot on the map. And And then there was applause. It's the first and only time in my life that I've got to say who I am and where I'm from, and everybody knew what it meant. So I'm from a fairly obscure place, but we didn't even live there. We lived, 100 miles from there on our ranch. And then there was a lot of moving. My father then we went from being ranchers, and he became a forestry foreman on the coast. And then we moved back up to the interior, and a lot happened, but he became a log building instructor because that's something he did, and developed a series of very well-known books. But we lived completely off the grid, 30 miles.
Wow.
So there was no such thing as weekly lessons or going to concerts. But my parents did make the effort. First, when I was very young, like 4 years old, on the ranch, they drove us 200 miles to hear the Canadian Opera Company play or perform with their smaller touring group. And I remember that. And they made another similar trip much further down to Vancouver to see the Nutcracker. And I loved it. Oh my goodness. And I was still like almost 5 at that point. But that was it. We had to drive hundreds and hundreds of miles to hear something like that. And so at the time we lived outside of Prince George, BC, which is a big pulp and paper town in the middle of British Columbia. That's when the local high school had an infusion of instruments. Canada is not particularly well equipped in that regard. There's not a lot of instruments, but for some reason the high school that year got lots of instruments and a Busendorfer piano. And that instrument's still there like decades later. It was just, I don't know, there was money. And I got to hear a bassoon, but it took a year for them to actually be able to get one for me. So I started quite late, but I graduated high school at the age of 16. So I was in university at the age of 16. And that was a huge change. That was 500 miles away from home. I hadn't lived in a big city ever, but I had a great teacher. I had Christopher Millard as my teacher. And I went to classes for a couple of months, and then I just locked myself in a practice room. So, there's a magnet on my fridge, and it says, if I can't be a good example, please let me be a good warning. So don't try this at home, kids. It's not what people do to get ahead in life. I practiced all the time. I would get up before sunrise, and I'd practice till after midnight, go home, eat toast. I was very skinny, and then come back and do it again. So technically I failed my classes because I wasn't there, but I petitioned to the Senate. They knew me, and they granted a return to the university. So when I was 17, I came back to try first year again. I went to my classes for 1 more month, and then locked myself in a practice room and practiced a lot. On one of my West Coast tours, I got to go to that university and tell them about that while playing a recital. But I also auditioned for Curtis, and 3 of us got in that year, and I was number 2 in the roster. The number 1 was also a Canadian. It was 3 Canadians got in that year. And number 1 is Rob Weir. He went to San Francisco. I was number 2. I went to Montreal. And number 3 was Michael Hope, who's in Calgary. And Rick Ranty was in that year. He was a year young behind us. Anyway, so once I was at Curtis, then that's what you do. You don't really, at that time, you really didn't do academics, and everybody practiced. You had the opportunity to educate yourself. It was there. Such a immensely resourceful town, free huge libraries, museums. So I, again, just practiced and practiced and practiced. Work ethic was not an issue. It was super clear what I had to do. I had to do a lot to get better. I had no idea of how far I was behind. It was irrelevant. I did have a sense of it, but I didn't know what was strictly involved. And that was super motivating. You can also visualize. You can hear what you want to do. Anybody can do that. You can imagine what's possible. And if that's clear enough, then that's very instructive. And then if you have lucid and compassionate teachers, which I did, I had Bernard Garfield and Saul Schoenbach, and they were, immensely more skilled than I was, and yet they were collegial in their approach. I don't know if they were the children of the 60s or what, but it was so easy to communicate with them, as it was with Christopher. They understood what I was trying to do. They supported me with information, with reads. And yeah, and it seemed straightforward. That's what life would be. You work hard, you get better, you might get rewarded. It's not like that, but that's certainly what it felt like, given the trajectory. Yeah, and then I auditioned for 2 orchestras, the associate principal in the National Orchestra of Mexico and second bassoon in Montreal. I got both of them, but I chose Montreal because, well, number one, when I just bought my very first stereo, and I asked the personnel manager in Mexico, I forget what my question was, why I even thought about that. But I said, well, it'd be hard to bring that down. He says, well, just don't declare it. I don't really know why we had that conversation. And then it just seemed easier to go to Montreal. And Montreal had that immense recording contract with London Decca. They were just at the beginning of that. And I really wanted to be part of that. It was, wow, that was stressful. And I wasn't ready for that high level, fast-paced recording, but it's a great training, and I knew it would be. A few tears were shed, but it was worth it. And yeah.
What was it like going from living off grid to being on grid?
So when I was in high school, there were no bassoon teachers. So I would go to Vancouver, which was 500 miles away, and there was 1 flight a day. So I'd fly down, have a lesson, sleep overnight in the airport, fly back.
Wow.
And yeah, light switch is not complicated. And my parents did most of the planning to live off grid. But you know what? Your question's insightful, because now that you ask it, I remember that I had a headache most of the time that I was at Curtis for 4 years. The headache went away when I got my job. But yeah, I think it was, yeah, you had to dress like everyone else, and that was super challenging for me. It's not part of my nature, and I didn't understand the social implications. I mean, I wore some really, I I can understand them complaining about what I was wearing. It was nothing disrespectful in my mind, but if you come from a more rigid society, then, so those were the problems I had.
Could you tell us more about how your teachers influenced you?
They were fabulous people, and also all very independent minded, not adhering to some kind of previous teacher's methods, and remarkably generous with their time. Christopher Millard was, he and I share a birthday. He's a mere 6 years older than me. So when I was 16, he was 22. So a very young person, and he had no other students. So I'd have a 4-hour bassoon lesson and a 2 or 3 hour reed lesson. And then I was a skinny kid. He'd order pizza and feed me and send me out. So he didn't have time. He had a year where he sort of had time for that. And he was in his first year at the Vancouver Symphony. And then the second year, there wasn't quite as much time. And then sometimes after lessons, he would buy me borscht at the local Russian deli. And I would try to pay, and because it seemed fair. And he said, absolutely not. He said, when you have a student, you'll take care of them. And I took it serious. I was so innocent, but that's a really good thing that he said. And it was sincere. He made sure I was fed at least once a week. And he loaned me a bassoon. He loaned me a 5000 series Heckel when I had a beautiful Puchner, but it got water damage. It had to be sent back to the factory. And so he loaned me that Heckel, and that's what I auditioned for Curtis on. And then when I went there, I played their Heckel until I could get one of my own. But just the enormous generosity. And the same with Garfield. He was, and still is, such an independent person. He's curious about your intellect, curious about your point of view. Even though was the principal bassoonist for so long, there was no arrogance. I think his master's was in English, and Schoenbach's was in mnemonics. I could be wrong, but I think that was like
Wow.
pure intellect. Garfield was maybe composition in English. I could ask him. I could just email him tonight and check that. But yeah, they weren't part of a factory system of training bassoon players. They just weren't. And they kind of came to it themselves, and they had colorful families, and they shared their family with me. Like I knew their wives, and there was discourse as opposed to any kind of I wasn't required to worship them, but of course I did. And I made drawings for Mr. Garfield. When I left, I made him a big horse drawing. Like, why a horse? And they gracefully accepted it. So there was a nobility in them all. I don't know if I mentioned Gerald Corey. So when I was studying with Christopher, he sent me to study with Gerald Corey one summer, and so I was going from British Columbia to Ottawa, which it's far, and thousands of miles. And Mr. Corey said, "Well, you've come so far, I can't charge you for lessons." And again, that's the kind of thing that you do pay forward. It really helped me survive, but I didn't ask him for that. And again, so generous with his time. And he knew that there had to be a balance, so I babysat a bit for him. But it was the value of my babysitting compared to the value of what he gave me. So yeah, tremendous generosity and nobility. There was no mental abuse, no sense of danger with these people. Always the sense that how insecure teenage students can be. And I would ask Dr. Schoenbach, am I good? Like, am I? And he would we wrote to each other a lot, but this was a phone conversation. He said, "Well, put you in the top 1 to 4%." That was good. That kept me going. It was honest. He didn't say no. He didn't say you're the best. I knew I wasn't the best. That wasn't my question. It's, am I good? And he gave me an answer that could keep me going. And yeah, they had a direct way of being encouraging, which is essential for all of us. And also, we were required to work. They didn't give us endless. I have no handouts from any of them. Maybe from Gerald Corey, because he really systematized thought a lot, but they were given as examples. For him, it was a great joy to write out every physical step and taking it, both going and returning, everything. And I was an obsessive kid, so I liked following it, but I didn't have to. There was no sense of nursing along. It was, here's what we do. If you like it, we'll do more of it. So that's how I feel about it. I don't know if that's what they were thinking, but their independent minds and their deep honesty and reliability, those go beyond thought. Like, I just came to think everybody was that trustworthy and that good. They're not. That's okay. Yeah.
Nadina, did you always know that you wanted to go into music for a career?
I remember extremely clearly, desperately wanting to. Two things I remember. I felt that if I won an orchestral job, I felt that meant that I would have climbed the ladder of my own demands. And if I could win a job, that means I have the fluency, the command, the flexibility, and this soaring artistry that I could imagine. Definitively, it does not mean that. So that was surprising. And it's just another opportunity to keep working on that. And I also remember with profound clarity asking my fellow classmate, Rick Ranty, I said to him, "Do you think I could ever get a job?" And he paused and looked at me like just directly. And he said, "Of course you're going to get a job." He said, "It's just a matter of when." And his disgust was with my self-doubt. So what I'm saying is the self-doubt is, I don't know, I think it's a fixture of our lives, because our existence is a minor miracle and not to be taken for granted. But if the circumstances allow, yeah, we can feel both the immense doubt and a persistent burning vision about what we want to achieve. Sometimes we achieve it and we don't even know we've achieved it. We meaning me. And, so I guess it would help if I could give you an example, but it'll come to me. But he was right. Like, I just kept shooting at all the jobs and got a bunch of them. And then having won them, I really wanted to be a principal player. Playing in the second bassoon range is great training, but it's not my deep nature, and it's too hard and not enough fun. So for some people it is, not for me. But at that point I became a little insecure, because then you're working so hard at that one position that you suddenly feel, you start to be aware of a caste system in a world where what you've done marks you for life. It's like an actor ends up playing the same role over and over. I wasn't interested in that, but it's a little bit more of a determined pursuit at that point to change that course.
Any advice about working in the music industry that you could share with us?
I know it'd be nice to give you hope.
I like the just realistic tips and viewpoint.
I'm at an age when there's a certain amount of bitterness, and I never thought I would be bitter. When I was in my early 20s in orchestra, I was really good friends with Adolfo Bornstein, who was a second violinist, and he was profoundly bitter, and yet such a joyful mind, and he'd traveled the world and he loved music, but he was so jaded, and he smoked a lot, and he would give me a ride to work every morning. He'd pull up, I'd jump in, open my window, and he'd complain, and yet so full of love, so full of interest, so supportive and kind towards young players. And I never felt different from the older players, but I thought, I'll never be bitter. And I certainly never will have the kind of humor and grace that he did. He spoke so many languages, but he had every reason to be bitter. There's just the injustices that occur over time to second violinists and others. If you don't have a way out of it, just acknowledging it makes you bitter. But it is also funny, I think, as a musician. So advice, God help, I have no idea what to tell you. If you can do something else, do it. If you can get a real job, develop some real skills, and keep practicing hard, do it. I don't know what to tell you. Maybe I'll think of it. I used to be very encouraging. Now I think, oh. It's not that I don't want you in the profession. I do. I keenly want you. But it's a ridiculous profession. It's yeah, you have to be lucid about it. I think maybe that would be the most helpful thing. Even in my own book, I think I've said it. I can't remember if I said it. Get a lawyer. Get a lawyer really early on in your career so that you don't always have to worry about that. There's some advice. Yeah, so anyway, having a necessarily going to be adversarial. It's just somebody who helps you think it through and trains you. And then, when the pandemic started, I also had a big show in a city far away, and I talked a lot with their union, just working out the contract. And because a lot of my solo touring, my management never even thought of connecting with the AFM and filing contracts. So that really works against us if there's a ton of concerts like that. And it's no hardship for these presenters to do it through the AFM. It doesn't cost them anymore. You just reallocate the funds, and so it all works out to the same thing. You do a little paperwork, and then musicians, when they're old, have a bit of a security in the pension, and the union can continue. I think it really is a brotherly feeling, or a collegial, but really like family, to talk to these people in the different locals. Everyone is slightly different. They have different perspectives and different rates, but anyone who's working there, it seems motivated to help. And yeah, I joined the local when I was in Philadelphia, because you had to be a member of the union to audition for the Montreal Symphony. So when I joined in Philadelphia, then I promptly wrote to them and told them my local number, and they wrote back and said, well, you can't audition because this is for Canadians only. it was all by mail then. So I wrote back and said, I am Canadian. I just joined. By then it was too late to do the Canadian auditions. There can be miscommunications. um, it's all good. But informing ourselves about that stuff early on helps create structures that might defend us, because you really do need to be defended and supported to keep doing this career.
Mm-hmm.
You can't be fighting dragons at every turn.
Like an educational perspective comes to mind, where
Yes.
even in the music industry, it takes us to in an educational or mindset to share what we are, or
Yeah.
and redefine that for future generations. And I think that's something that was also eye-opening, where it's like, well, isn't this already known, that of course we it's work, and but
Yeah.
actually no, we need to continue to advocate for ourselves. And yeah,
Very
not
well said.
knowing, yeah, that we need still need to do that. And um,
Exactly. Like it's sort of like we thought, well, there was the feminist revolution, so that's all taken care of. And musicians, made huge advances. But you're absolutely right. We have to re-articulate, re-examine, and as an artist, I'm a little bit lazy in that regard. I would like someone else to take care of that. But in the end, it's not that hard to take care of it. It's just a matter of experience and time and talking to different people. Because sometimes the bitter people are quite helpful. Sometimes they're just too bitter to be helpful, so you might want to have two or three. Um, yeah, to not make assumptions. And
mhm.
that's where I've hit various walls. You feel a little bit reticent about spelling things out for people. But
Mm,
if you're actually going to do high level performance and presentation, things have to be spelled out,
mhm.
and roles and duties have to be either quickly understood or rejected quickly enough that people can be replaced, and we can move on.
Nadina, can you tell us about your teaching career and your teaching philosophies?
So when I was 22, I started with the Montreal Symphony, and my colleague Richard Honeck um, very much wanted me to have the opportunity of teaching. So I was offered, it's all contract teaching, so offered the contract position at McGill University, and I was horrified. First of all, the students were older than me, some of them, and that just terrified me. And I said, furthermore, I've only been playing for 5 years. Like, what am I going to teach them? And Richard said, quite pragmatically, he said, well, you'll actually remember what needs to be taught because you're so much closer to it. And you're not going to hurt them. But I resisted for a couple of years and then started teaching. And I guess my philosophy then and now, and as you can tell from maybe flipping through my book, is based on the security of our scales and chords, building our technique from the elements of what makes up our music. And because I could hear, like, I had to practice a lot and develop quickly. There was never any sense of I had achieved what I wanted or complacency. It didn't exist. But I do have recordings, and I can hear the huge jumps in my playing. And it always came from a systematic approach to scales and chords. But I love them. It's not painful for me to do them. I find them as musical as a piece. So, but they also build my face and physicality in a way that improvising or pieces don't. But what you do with your scales will last in your sound and your technique. So it also has to flex over your career. You can't do, some people do the same long tones their whole life. And I think that's more of a meditation and a grounding mechanism. I think in terms of, whatever you do is fine. I don't care. But for me, there has to be a subtle evolution depending on where your aspirations end up being pointed. So teaching philosophy is really inherent in the title of my book, Solitary Refinement. You do have to think about why you're doing this. This is yeah, it's you don't have to be a bassoonist. Nobody has to be a bassoonist. And if you are going to be one, then you need to point your compass and follow it. And I can be part of that. And also, I don't think people should be lazy about reeds, and that is a moral judgment. I do. It's you play the bassoon, you should make reeds. So that doing my teaching statements, make your reeds, and 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 systematically and methodically over time pursue your scales. Beyond that, there's other things that I would assume that I would try to emulate my former teachers, just because it felt natural to be a colleague and to be a resource, but not to be the person rapping your knuckles or making you practice. If I have to make you practice, you should just stop. I don't care. Do something else. Let's go have ice cream. But if you don't want to practice, then don't. I don't care. I really don't care. But some people do stop practicing because they are sad, or something's happened, and I think that's a whole other discussion. And that's part of knowing the person and not forcing them through a routine. So I think there has to be flexibility mixed with the rigor. I also believe in timelines, that people create a timeline at the beginning of the year, but also to cover 4 years, to cover 10 years. Very few of my students can actually do it, partly because I think they don't want to limit themselves, but I think by creating a plan, you can change the plan. And I always discover that even though it doesn't feel like I've achieved what I wanted, I have, because I put the idea there, and then you start making the small decisions that lead towards it. Yeah.
Do you have any tips or advice on coping with music performance anxiety, if that's something that you've experienced?
Well, when I was younger, I definitely did, and practicing was the cure. Familiarity is the cure. So the whatever you think the height of preparation is, and if you haven't done something, you don't know what the height of preparation is. And also, you have to have some real crash and burns to know what ineffective preparation is. It's just like driving a car. You're probably going to bump a fender at some point, so don't be afraid of it. But for me, it was a definite physical equalizer. So for me, the stuff that made me terribly nervous was orchestral things. I found that some of the really delicate things, and a cellist, when I told him that, he said, well, do you practice everything in your part? And I said, well, no, if some of it's just really goose-eggy. He said, for him, the surest way, he said, if he had a general nervousness about a particular passage in the work, he would make the effort to play every note of that piece, even though it's not the same. Like, you could achieve the same thing by studying the score, but there was that tactile grounding effect. It totally worked for me. When I was doing big auditions when I was younger, and that sort of feeling of that everything's going to rattle off the shelf and you don't have control of yourself. I don't know who, somebody must have suggested it, but I tried this thing that I discovered one day, which is breathing. You breathe deeply, then you breathe a little more and you fill the top of your lungs. And you have to be a little bit relaxed to do that. And I do 10 of them before an audition. And that means you actually have to calm down for that long. If you breathe, and just hold it slightly, let it out. 10 of them. You don't get to 2, 3 really good ones. Yeah, that's enough. I'm moving on. You have to do 10. You can do more, but I do 10 because really by then I have to go do something. And so that's from my childhood of going. I remember wearing a little white sweater and leaning against the grand piano at Curtis and just feeling how shiny it was, and doing those breaths, and then playing for Mr. Garfield, who was kind and direct, and I wasn't nervous once I played for him, but going in I was terrified. And yeah, there's probably more, but it's the familiarity with the situation. And again, when I was a young professional, when I won the MSO audition, I was really practicing so much. And the night before the audition, I snuck into the McGill University and I practiced for 4 hours, and at some point somebody threw something against the door, because I just repeat, and then I break it down, repeat, right up to the audition. I don't do that now, but I did it then. Somebody threw something, and I thought, and then I kept practicing. Like, you can't stop. What? And it could have been an accident. Like, it didn't really feel like I was in any danger, but I remember that sound, boom, and it sort of shook me up, and then I just kept going. Repetition helps me. It calms me down. I'm like a terrier. You take me around the track 50 times, I'm going to be better off. That's about it. And breathe. Breathing never hurts. And then having the experiences. So that's the last thing. When I was a young professional, I would play for the principal oboe, who I guess still is, Ted Baskin. He was great to play for, because there was not a cruel bone, at least in my experience, nothing ever cruel, but a relentless standard. So he, just like my other teachers, we just go and go and go and go and go. And then he would say, "Do you want a bagel?" And his wife would, we'd stop. Yes, definitely want a bagel. And, but that pursuit of the idea for long enough that something gets carved into your mind, and you forget to be nervous. And then, heck, being nervous is a sensation. That's why people drink coffee. They want that activation. So eventually it all gets morphed into energy. And yeah, it's experiencing the things enough. So many kids do one recital, and like that's their whole life. You're gonna have to do 100. And they can't be called recitals. They have to be actual concerts. But great players are high strung, so just get used to it, or not get used to it, but embrace the sensation.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in school, there was one point when I'd come to my lessons with Dr. Schoenbach, and I'd actually be trembling, and he looked down at my hands and he said, "Stop drinking coffee," and he was kidding. And I looked at him completely amazed. I said, "Does coffee do that to you?" And he said, "I was kidding. Are you drinking coffee?" And I said, "Yeah, I just discovered Arabian coffee." He said, "Yeah, it does that to you. So you might want to just lay off on it."
Yes.
It's funny what we don't know. It is really great. Yeah. But it really is a sign of life and love that you are that nervous. And also physical training. I don't think bassoonists come into their full strength until their 20s. I don't know why. It just seems to take us a bit longer. Like 20s, 30s. It's not as early as the other instruments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Nadina, are there any music-related injuries that you could share with us about?
Yeah, it's sort of in the past, but I had, God, I suddenly forget that. Like, when I was in the Montreal Symphony, I got thoracic outlet syndrome. I think that's it, thoracic outlet. So this part I was so tense, and this got constricted, and it makes your arms tense. And
Yes.
there was a diagnosis that if I kept going that way, I'd lose all feeling in my hands. And I do so much physical work that sometimes I do have that problem, but I can pull out of it. So that was my big injury, and I left. I took a leave of absence from the Montreal Symphony after my first decade, and then felt so good being away from it. That's the question: when do you stay and fight? When do you leave? And I can't really second guess myself, because when you leave, it's because it doesn't feel possible to thrive.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so that injury, that took a while to jig myself, but that's also why I hate sitting and holding the bassoon and not really being able to move. That caused the injuries for me. So I always stand as a player, because I have the freedom to rebalance. And also when I feel trapped, I start to do the things that cause the injuries. But that's the only, and it was a big one, but it goes away. I mean, you feel it for a long time, but it didn't stop me from playing. Yeah.
Could you share with us a little bit about your reed making style?
So when I'm making reeds, my approach is to make reeds a lot and to play new reeds.
Mm-hmm.
But that seems a bit hypocritical these days, because it's just not playing that much, so I don't bother. and I'm putting my time elsewhere. But that just feels like this COVID sabbatical is allowing me to do that. So when I get back, when the premiere of the concerto starts looming on the horizon, my composer, Augusta Reed Thomas, is extraordinarily well organized. So I already have a first draft. So, as you build towards the performance, the reeds are definitely part of that. I feel that just like the scales develop the reeds develop the scales. It's part of being connected to the horn. But the freehand style of reed making, I started in 2011, and the first album I did with using that style was the Vivaldi album, and there's been other albums since then. So I don't think there's really a discernible difference, but I had not been doing it that long when I did the Vivaldi album, and when I listened to some of the video playbacks, you can hear when I've taken a reed that I wasn't quite sure of, and you just have to muscle through, and that's a funny feeling. But it's now it's just as natural as any other style, and just so much faster and immediate. So, I mean, you can watch any of my videos about it. I do a freehand shape and then a freehand profile. They're all very similar, but the variations are also, you can make conscious variations if you want to. I mean, any variation is minuscule, because I basically play a fairly large reed, but you can alter the dimensions for repertoire or in response to cane density, or if you're playing in different altitudes. In general, it's something that you can start with as many guidelines as you want. I do 3 markings that, like in the beginning, I had all these lines to center myself so that I would do a symmetrical shape, but very quickly you can learn to do a symmetrical shape. I have 3 reference lines that mark the collar, the center of the reed, and both collars. My philosophy of reed making: make reeds. However, whatever your style is, make reeds. If you want to experiment, you can. Developing the discipline to do it freehand is way easier than people think. I think I was dissatisfied with the shapes that were commercially available. They were always, and a lot of them are wide in a way that intrinsically allow you to alter them. So you're expected to do some freehand alteration. But I found that tiresome because it really locked me in. Most of them are too narrow, utterly too narrow I want a reed that will play very high and very low. I mean, range-wise. And the little narrow reeds have to be, the way I play, they have to be over trimmed. I can't play high on them. They're driving crazy. My whole time at Philadelphia was learning to play the Philadelphia style reed, which does win you auditions because there's beautiful control, but it doesn't let me play my full repertoire. At least everyone has an intrinsic voice, and it didn't suit my voice. There's 4 steps. It's been a month or 2 since I've taught it. It's sometimes different than actually doing it. I take a piece of cane. I mark the 3 collar points. I use a sharp X-Acto knife. I mean, the 2 collar points, the center point, and we're working in 4 quadrants. So you perceive it. You learn to look at the reed as a whole, but perceive those 4 quadrants. And I do a rough shape. So it's pretty close to and I work right side, flip the cane, right side, and then you work towards yourself. I'm always working on the right side, but the first cuts are done with the butt of the cane against the table. The second 2 cuts are done with a little slightly dangerous with you cutting towards yourself. That's the rough shape. And then I do the rough profile. I cut the collars in, take the bark off. And when I say rough, it's not that rough. It's just the general profile. And in the beginning, I would draw the profile, but obviously with each scrape, it comes off. So it's tiresome. It's really not that hard. If you look at the side, you test the torque of the cane. Once the rough profile is done, then you can fold the cane, and then you can finalize your shape. The one thing to remember is, because it's relatively flat and you're seeing it flat, which you're not used to, don't make the shape as narrow as you want. It just should be slightly wider than your ideal final shape. For me, it's much easier to finish the shape when it looks like a reed. But often I've flipped it and it's been perfectly symmetrical, way too wide, but perfectly symmetrical. And once in the early stages, I went ahead and made a reed that was much too wide, but it was a beautiful sounding reed. So I took the string off and I recut it. And that's really hard to do because by then the tube is done and you're cutting under. But I was able to cut it down. So the other benefits of freehand are more immediately apparent for me when I'm playing historical instruments, because they are all so different from each other, and I don't play that a lot. So if you receive a historical bassoon and you don't, I had some that I didn't actually know what pitch they were, whether they were 435 or 4. So you try some reeds and see where it kind of plays in tune, and then you have enough, every bassoonist has enough experience to know, well, this one should be probably a little wider in the throat or narrower in the throat, but so then you can do that freehand, test it, and you can zero in fairly quickly on a good shape and dimensions for a new bassoon. And now, like, I have a Heckel, a 15,000 series Heckel. I'm very happy with the shape I have, but with the new bell, it's a different horn. It needs a slightly narrower shape in the back third, like not the collar, but just up from there. Try different densities of cane. Yeah, it's not hard. It's something that I did teach my students. Some of them caught on extremely quickly. One of them, who's now a business major and he's working for Spotify, his first reaction was, "Oh, this will be a lot cheaper." And I thought, that's very pragmatic. It is much cheaper. But that's just one benefit. My feeling is that you can be quite accurate and you can make reads on the go, and it's fun. It's easy. It's not hard. And it's nice, and you have to have a sharp knife. You can't fart around with that. So it's, and at first it feels dangerous and your little heart's beating, but it's just a bassoon reed. It doesn't matter.
Is there any final advice that you could share for musicians just starting out their music careers?
Well, I do think that you have to follow your motivation. So it's an impractical way to make a living, but it's possible. So the discipline that you can bring to it and the vision are essential. When I was very young, I kept thinking there had to be somebody who could tell me what to do, but I would like to suggest that we're all making it up, and some of us have been given the privilege of enough opportunity to test theories. So have that confidence that you can figure this out, but also have the curiosity and an equal measure of confidence to talk to different people. I have one former student, and he had such deep curiosity about, and genuine, respectful curiosity about what every accomplished player had to say. And I think of him when I need the inspiration of discipline, like the open-mindedness to absorb what people are saying, listening long enough to actually hear what they're saying instead of what you're hearing, which for me, they're often two different things. And to listen to others, but with that analytical and collector's curiosity. And to, of course, to play when you're at that young evolving stage, to not only play for bassoon teachers, do play for flute players who have no understanding of the difficulty of our instrument. Play for oboe players who don't want to hear about any of our challenges because they have so many more. I mean, you can hear their mistakes. You can't always hear ours. Play for trumpet players who have arrogance yet curiosity. Play for trombone players who can do things you didn't know they could do. Play for violinists who might not realize what we're capable of, but be challenged by all of them. So I did a lot of that, and it was always developmental. I mean, sometimes the flute players had nothing to say because it's just so different, but most of the other instrumentalists were very articulate. I mean, but even their inability to say something was instructive to me. I guess you had to be there, but yeah. And also play for non-musicians and see if you can bring them joy, or if they glaze over. It's actually significant. Don't expect them to be nourished by your artistry because it might not exist in enough of a form or it might, like actually seeing how your music is received. And then I would also ask people to do what I didn't do enough of when I was young, is to have the confidence to memorize and also the confidence to improvise. I mean, those are
Great.
all good things. Yeah. And they're all from the self. So you can reference yourself while inviting others to participate, but not handing it away. Yeah.
Is there anyone that you would be interested to see interviewed next on this project?
Well, have you interviewed my friend Mathieu Lussier?
No, I haven't.
He's wonderfully articulate
Hmm.
about music. Another incredible person is Leslie Ross, the avant-garde bassoonist and bassoon maker. And I mean, have you done Rebekah Heller yet?
I
I would
haven't
just be,
done Rebekah yet.
I would just be so interested in hearing whatever she had to say, because
Yes.
she has courage and style. And I love listening to Sergio Azzolini talk about music. I mean, there's a lot of coverage of him, but he's still so engaging and so surprising when he speaks.
Those are great suggestions, and I would love to reach out to them, Nadina. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for this opportunity to interview
Likewise.
you. It's
Thank you
been
for the
such
great
a
opportunity.
joy. Mm.
It's a joy to talk to you. At the time has evaporated, and I appreciate your generous preparation.
For everyone tuning in, keep an eye out for 2 events held every week on the Music Link. Every Thursday Central Daylight Time, a new YouTube video launches, and every Sunday Central Daylight Time, a live Zoom group discussion is hosted by the interviewed guest. So check out Nadina's hosting session coming up this Sunday, where she's sharing about her new book, Solitary Refinement, and her next book with the working title Dream of Consciousness, her new concerti by composer Augusta Reed Thomas, more about the Council of Canadian Bassoonists, all about the ebb and flow that marks all of our careers, more about recording careers and how this promotes collaboration, new projects, and commissions, how to stay creatively engaged and motivated in your music and life, and so much more. Find out more about Nadina and her work at nadinamackyjackson.com, and feel free to reach out to her anytime. She would love to hear from you. Please like, comment, and share any questions or feedback in the section below, and we'd be happy to incorporate these in the live discussion. Please subscribe to this channel and turn on the bell for notifications, which really helps keep the Music Link moving forward. The Music Link is a New Zealand-based resource for people around the world to share, learn, and connect through music. Thank you for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next video.